Most speakers were known for something else before they became famous. Martin Luther King was a reverend. Nelson Mandela, a lawyer. Jacinda Ardern was a DJ. These great speakers learned their performance skills in a different arena and then challenged themselves to use these skills to speak on a new topic. I'm recording this video at the start of 2022, so this is a fantastic point in the year to challenge yourself to try something new over the next 12 months. But you don't have to wait until the start of the year to do this. You don't have to say, well, this is the 2022 challenge and I can't do it now that it's in the future. You always have this opportunity to challenge yourself with your speaking. For example, over the last 12 months, I've done lots of different speeches that are outside of my wheelhouse and aren't necessarily things that are associated with me. For example, I was competing in the UK and Ireland finals in Toastmasters in the humorous speech contest, and my speech was about cancer. Yes, really, a humorous speech about cancer. I challenged myself to find a way that I could make a horrible subject like cancer funny. And it got me to the UK and Ireland finals. So I managed to take on that challenge and do something with it. Another speech that I did this year was promoting the sport of rugby. Now, rugby is a huge personal passion of mine. I spend a lot of my personal time invested in it. But again, I'm not known as a professional athlete or someone who speaks in the arena of sports. But I wanted to promote another one of my passions through the power of speaking. Another speech that I did this year that I felt was one of my most important speeches actually was I was talking about how I found out as a teenager that one of my friends was gay. And at that time, I didn't have a particularly accepting attitude towards gay people or the LGBT community in general. So I told this story of how ultimately I separated myself from that friend and how later in life I found out another friend was gay and I had a very different reaction at that point because of the progress that I'd made. So these are the types of speeches that I was using to challenge myself, put myself in new directions, put myself in somewhere uncomfortable, for example. Saying that I used to have less than progressive attitudes towards gay people, the LGBT community, not something that I particularly want to broadcast too often, but I think sometimes it's important to share things that make us uncomfortable if there's a meaningful message behind it. I want you to think about that for your speaking. How can you take your speaking in a new direction? Step out of what you normally do. Because what I find is that when you step out of what you normally do, you then learn a new skill. You find a new way of telling a story. You look at a different perspective on the same types of topics, and you can bring that back into your regular speaking. And I think my speaking has certainly benefited from practicing humor in a subject not traditionally associated with being funny, about sharing things that are uncomfortable for me to share. And not in that, oh, this is uncomfortable for me to share, but I know that you'll like me better after hearing it. Sharing something that's uncomfortable and, to be honest, paints me as a little bit of a dick. These are things that you can then take back in and enhance the speaking that you're already doing in your topic of expertise, in your field of authority. So let's look at 3 different ways that you can challenge your speaking, jazz things up, learn new skills that you can bring back into your current wheelhouse. The first way that you can challenge your speaking is to speak about a similar topic in a new way. This is what I did with my humorous cancer speech. This speech I suspected would work and I could get away with, because it was actually something that had formed a foundation of my speaking for a long time. For anyone who's been with me over the years and perhaps came across me in my time as a speaker, not just as a speaker coach, you'll know that the foundational story of what I did as a motivational speaker was based around the experience of losing my dad to cancer. And it's still something that I bring up a lot in my time as a speaking coach as well. And ultimately, Dad never got his message out into the world. And his life wasn't as fulfilled as it could have been. I had told the motivational, inspirational version of Dad's story for a number of years. And I thought, I've done this story. I know how to do it. I can tweak it here and there, but it's essentially saying the same thing. What if I can tell this same story in a very different way? So I talked about some of the humorous aspects of Dad's cancer. Yes, really, there was humour. Some dark humour, some graveyard humour. There was definitely some humour there, though. I've also lost my stepdad to cancer as well, and he forms the basis of a lot of humour in this speech. So I figured I can probably get away with this speech because two of my, let's face it, father figures have died because of cancer. So I reckon I don't look like a complete and utter arsehole making fun about cancer. But it's still a tricky one to pull off, isn't it? So that was me taking a similar topic. I already knew about the experience of watching someone you love being lost to cancer. I thought, how can I show that it's not 100% doom and gloom? There's some moments of light that come through there, and can I make a speech centered around those chinks of light? So that's the first way you can challenge yourself this year. Take something that's familiar to you, take something that you've talked a lot about, and think about, how can I present this in a different way? And that's perhaps the easiest challenge to set yourself, because you've already got the content there. You don't have to entirely reinvent the wheel here. You're just thinking about, how can I take what I'm using and perhaps have just done the same old way over and over, and how can I bring a different slant onto it? And I might still go back to the tried and tested method, but I can take a few snippets from this new way and add some freshness and some life to what I'm already speaking about. The second way to challenge yourself is to speak about a passion outside of what you're known for. And again, this is relatively simple to do, although it's not something that you have existing foundations and content for. There are lots of things that if we were sitting having a coffee or we're sitting in a bar having a conversation, there are lots of things that you could spend hours speaking about because you know them inside out. You've experienced them so richly. They excite you, they enthuse you. And this really fits in line with my rugby speech that I did this year. I've never done a speech on rugby, but rugby is something that I follow on a weekly basis. I'm watching matches or I'm listening to the news about players, about changes in the game. I look ahead to what weekends I'm going to take off so that I can sit and watch the rugby. When am I going to buy tickets to go and watch a rugby match in the stadium? This is something that I'm very passionate about, and it's very easy for me to speak on. I've got loads of knowledge and loads of perspective on it. It's just about finding a way to put that into a speech. And that's ultimately what I did with this rugby speech. I was promoting rugby as a sport, and not through the mechanics of the sport. These are the rules and these are some of the star players. I was actually talking about some of the values and history that underline rugby. About how rugby is one of the few sports where referees are really respected. About how home and away fans don't sit in different parts of the stadium, they sit next to each other. About how even Nelson Mandela used the Rugby World Cup to bring around some racial harmony in his newly formed democratic South Africa. These are aspects of the sport that you perhaps don't know about until someone tells you about them. And that's what I wanted to do with this speech, speaking on something I was very passionate about, but definitely not something I'm known for. Think about how you could do this. What's something that you're really passionate about? A hobby, an interest, a pastime? And how can you really extol the virtues of that? How can you captivate us and fascinate us, telling us about your passion, allowing your enthusiasm to seep through into the audience? And the skills that you learn in exciting people about that passion are skills you can bring into exciting people about your regular content, about what you usually present on. Our Facebook group, Rise and Inspire Speakers, provides you with a safe, supportive community to develop the skills to get your message out into the world. We host a virtual summit, Inspire Week, within the group every month, where you can sign up for a 30-minute slot to speak live in the group. This is a free opportunity you can sign up for month after month to practice your skills, try new things,
and refine aspects of your story and message. There is a ton of educational content that gets pumped into this group. You can access ongoing educational resources that help you gain more confidence on camera, create more compelling speech content, and develop a deeper connection with your ideal audiences. Speaking of connection, the members of our community are fantastic. They are like-minded people who, just like you, want to make a difference in the world and will cheer you on and encourage you every step of the way. If you want to master your virtual speaking skills, then this is the place to be.
Coming on to the third way of sparking up your speaking, and if the first two were relatively easy, this one really steps things up in terms of how challenging it is. But as you might imagine, the things that are the most challenging in life are often the most rewarding. Here it is. Tell a story or share an experience that paints you in a bad light. When we talk about vulnerability as a speaker, vulnerability as a speaker is not supposed to be comfortable. The very definition of vulnerability is that you feel at risk when you tell it. And a lot of the time when people say, I'm being authentic and I'm being vulnerable, they're really just sharing things that they're super comfortable about and they know will paint them in a good light. Oh, I used to be really mean in my relationships, but now I'm a lot nicer and I'm humble and I'm grateful. Oh. Come on, that's just emotional manipulation. That isn't true vulnerability. True vulnerability is sharing something that you feel uncomfortable talking about. True vulnerability is sharing something that doesn't necessarily endear people to you. In isolation. When you tell it as a complete narrative, hopefully you're going to get across to people that you're not such a bad person. You've just made some mistakes and you've learned from them. And this is where that third speech I was telling you about really came in. I wanted to tell that speech because I think it's a hugely important issue, and I thought, well, how can I, as a straight person, communicate the importance of LGBT awareness? And I realized that I could do that through my personal experience, not through my personal experience of being a member of that community, but my personal experience of being intolerant of members of that community. And so that's why I told the story of my childhood friend, and when I started to get the feeling and the vibe that he was gay, I didn't know, but I kind of got that feeling. I started to really distance myself from him because the toxic masculinity of high school male dynamics, that's not a good look to be friends with someone who's gay. It makes you look like a pussy and all that kind of shit. I hope things have changed now, but I suspect they haven't changed as much. And so I told this story of how ultimately I ended that friendship because of my friend's suspected sexuality. I found out those suspicions were correct later on in life. And then I told the story of another friend who I found out about their sexuality much later when we were adults. And I had a much more tolerant and accepting perspective on his sexuality compared to my old friend. And the moral of the story was that really I lost to friends because of my ignorance. I could still be friends with both of them if it wasn't for my backward thinking, my lack of awareness, and my lack of tolerance around members of the LGBT community. And so that's the way that I wanted to share the importance of why we need to have Pride Month, why we need to have Pride marches, why as straight people we need to be allies to members of the LGBT community. And so that was something that didn't paint myself in a good light. As I'm telling that now, you're perhaps still thinking, well, David, I still think you're wrong for doing that. And you should, because I was wrong for doing that. It's not something that I'm proud of. It's not something that's nice to share. I could quite happily do this video and not have to share that. I could talk about, here are the ways that you challenge your public speaking. You do this, you do this, you do this. I don't need to give the examples of that. But I think it's important to give the examples, because when you give the example, you show the humanity. You show the flaws. You show that none of us are perfect. And when you take yourself off the pedestal a little bit, your audience are going to feel more rapport and more connection to you. Yes, they're still going to say, you know what, you messed up there. But hey, I've messed up as well. And there's some things that I wouldn't be particularly proud of to stand on stage and tell you about. We have that shared humanity, and you can really connect with that when you share something that makes you uncomfortable. Share something about yourself that paints you in a bad light. So try that out to start jazzing up your speaking. Try each of those 3 suggestions. Talk about a familiar topic in a new light. Talk about a passion you haven't previously talked about. And share something that paints you in a not so favourable light. And when you do these things, you always learn from experiments and exploration. It's not something you're necessarily going to go on do. You might not start telling that story or share that content in the brand new way all of the time. You might not suddenly start talking about this new passion. You perhaps aren't going to be sharing that uncomfortable experience every single time you speak. But the skills you learn through testing out your speaking and extending your range of what you can do is going to come back and benefit you in the future.